Chapter 18. After several hours of practice, the power was flowing easier each time I used it. As much as I wanted to jump ahead and get back to combat and defense, I knew that day one was already nearly a disaster from my impatience. Besides, it turned out I had a great deal yet to learn about the basics. For instance, moving air was easy, and I could move it at great distances too. However, the trick was to move it in a controlled manner. Sure, it was easy to pull the air off the top of a book and it would just flip open. But to do it in such a controlled way that it didn't just whip open was difficult indeed. For the last half hour, I was trying to get a feather to float on air movements across the table. Everything I did seemed to send the feather flitting wildly in the air. "You're doing fine, Finn," Max said encouragingly. "Believe it or not, the tiny, precise movements with the power are often much harder than the big, direct movements. For instance, it would be easier to throw a brick through a window than thread a needle." "Agreed," I said. "I can't get this damn feather to do anything I want." Giving in to my frustration, I spread my fingers at the feather, now floating back down to the table after my last overzealous burst of air. Using the power, I stopped the feather mid-air and slammed it back down to the table. It was totally flat, pressed like it was under a heavy book. "I think it's time for a break," Max said wisely. Apparently being frustrated didn't prevent me from using the power, but I'm sure it can't be helping. "Dinner should be here soon anyway." I took the opportunity to sidle over to Nella, who was working with Daniel on some homework. Figures, homeschooling. Not that I have a real problem with homeschooling in general. God knows I still have serious psychological trauma from my middle school days. I just was concerned that the poor kid didn't seem to have a single friend his age. Daniel saw me coming out of the corner of his eye and dropped his pencil. "Hey, Finn, come to save me from the Rancor monster here?" "That better not be me you're referring to," Nella said, an edge in her tone like a disapproving teacher. "Oh, I'm sure it was just a figure of speech referring to the beast that is algebra," I said quickly to bail him out. Daniel smirked up at me. Nella threw her pencil down and said, "Fine, we can be done for today, but that leaves more of the monster for you tomorrow." Daniel had already slid out of the chair and was met halfway across the room by the big black fur bag. They chased each other around the couch like a dance of freedom. Nella turned her attention to me and said, "That gives me a chance to talk to you a bit anyway. How goes the training?" "You would have to ask the professor there," I replied, pointing at Mac across the room. "I get the impression I'm more of a brick person than a feather type." "Indeed. So is everyone at first. The fact that you are already moving things directly is quite unusual, though. You are weeks or months ahead of where you should be. I'm encouraged." "Glad to hear it, because I'm getting a bit frustrated at my lack of progress. I'm sure I'll get better after practicing some by myself back in my apartment." Nella went a bit white. "We need to discuss your living arrangements, Finn. You aren't safe back in your apartment. It would be wise if you considered living here till we get you relocated." "Whoa there, Nella. I think you took a wrong turn at the intersection of crazy and get stuffed," I thought. "I'm not moving. I like my place, my job, and my routine. I don't see why this can't be part of my routine without completely wrecking my life." Nella considered me closely. "You still don't believe me that you're in very real danger, do you?" I shook my head slowly but definitively. "Let me tell you what we know. Not what we theorize or believe to be true, but what we actually know. Anan is an Oryx. The two goons that attacked you in the coffee shop are hunters. So that leaves your friend Tiffany." The rage fuse was just lit in my belly. Deep inside, I knew where this was going, and I was not about to follow. "Tiffany is a seeker, Finn. And not just a normal seeker. She goes after high profilers like you and Daniel. We need to contain this." "You don't know her. You have no proof of this." I was a tiny bit surprised that I naturally came to her defense. Nella straightened up and replied firmly, "I do have proof, and your continued involvement with her puts our entire cell at risk. Fuse lit. Rage monkey in 3, 2, 1. The thing with an Irish temper is that it takes virtually nothing to go from 0 to 10. Once at 10, it can either go loud, violent direction or the silent, fuming direction. It doesn't matter in the long run. Both directions end up with the scotch in my hand. I opted for the silent version. Nella, I appreciate your hospitality. I'll be taking my leave now. You know where to find me if you want to try this again tomorrow. I will not be changing anything on my end. She opened her mouth to say something, but I was already walking away. I got to the door and realized that I had never tried to open it before. I put my hand on the handle, and I instantly knew it was pointless to even try. My frame of mind was full of rage. I looked back at Nella, who was getting her purse and keys. You probably won't last the night, Finn. Just think of how hurt everyone will be if you get killed. Think of Daniel. Manipulative bitch. Open this door now. My voice was soft and low. I could see that Mac and Zoo were looking our way, curious, no doubt, as to what could have set me off. Daniel finally came around and Nella had a tear in her eye. The voice in the back of my head was saying I should at least consider her suggestion. In my experience, that voice goes quiet quickly with a good dose of scotch. That was my priority at the moment. Nella moved to the door and opened it. With a wave to the onlooking crew, I left into the dark garage, Nella following. The ride back was mostly silent till we got close. Nella's voice was a bit shaky. Finn, I didn't communicate that well, but it seems likely to be true. Tiffany is involved in things beyond what you see on the surface. Please be careful. I'm always careful, Nella, I lied. I'm never careful. Usually I'm intentionally reckless. Back when I thought life had meaning and purpose, I was the exact opposite. Then the layers of deception began falling away, revealing this empty, godless existence where death is the end and not some fanciful beginning of a magical eternity in the clouds. In a way, it is freeing. There is no reason to wait, nothing to risk, nothing to lose if the end is truly that, the end. Now that Nella and her crew had shown me that there was more to life than dying, I had to reevaluate my priorities. Damn, life in the shallow end can be quite entertaining. Nella was a block away and pulled up to a stoplight. I decided to walk the last bit and popped the door open. Thanks for the ride, Nella. I think I'll walk the rest and clear my mind. Swing by the shop around 9 o'clock tomorrow morning if you want to try this again. I will, Finn. Be there, okay? No worries. And I'll give Tiffany your regards. For a second, I think she was considering flicking me off, but instead she just waved and pulled away. The walk back to the shop seemed as normal as could be imagined. No ninjas or assassins leapt out of the bushes. No drive-by shootings or midgets with chainsaws. I was almost a little disappointed. The shop was mostly empty except for a couple teenage girls who were completely immersed in their phones, totally oblivious to the world around them. Mama Jo was wiping down a table and froze as I walked through the door. She rushed over to me with a bit of panic in her eyes. What's the matter? What are you doing back? Admittedly, her concern alarmed me. Oh, I just missed you, that's all, I replied coolly. Seriously, I live here, you know. Why the surprise at my presence? I expected you to be away for a while. Does Nella know you're back? Yeah, she dropped me off. How do you know each other anyway? Oh, we're just friends. We go way back. How far back? I thought. And does she know how Nella makes her ice for her scotch? How well do you know her? I asked. Well enough to trust her completely, Mama Jo replied. Don't just stand there, play me something. Right. One song and then I have to get some chow. I'm starving. I slid onto the piano bench and popped open the cover of the keys. To my surprise, there was a folded note. Call me, piano man. 763-555-1994. Tiff. Billie Holiday it is, then, and I worked into my version, which contained a few discords and fishnet stockings. The song was getting better, and I added a bridge towards the end that might still need some work, but all in all, it wasn't too bad. Mama Jo had taken a seat and was listening, smiling again. After finishing, I got up and walked over to her. She stood and a tear was on her cheek. I'm a sucker for a crying dame, so I gave her a big hug. I never knew you were into jazz. I would have played that before. She wiped a tear off her cheek and waved me away. Oh, don't be silly. Your music isn't that good. Ouch. Thanks for that piece of humble pie. She continued. I'm just worried about you. Not you too. Come on, really? I can take care of myself. You'll see. Mama Jo gently cupped my face with her hands and looked deep into my eyes. You cannot be saved till you choose to save yourself. Learn this before it is too late. I said nothing, just smiled and backed out the door. It is strange that when I desperately want to hear from that voice in the back of my head, he seems to be sleeping. Mama Jo was part of this, to be sure, but the non-stop doom and gloom foreboding was getting old. Pulled up my cell as I walked to the bar next door to call Tiffany. It rang 4 or 5 times before she picked up. Yes. Her voice was flat, almost mechanical. Tiffany, it's Finn. Her voice immediately lightened and I could hear her smiling. Finn, you got my note, clever boy. Busy? Actually, on my way to get a greasy burger. Care to join me? This was a good casual date line I've used frequently. Instead of making it an official date per se, it becomes a neutral place where we both happen to be found. How about we try someplace else? How about someplace a bit quieter so we can talk? I could come pick you up in 5 minutes. 2 simultaneous voices in the back of my head exploded in a competitive debate. One concerned for my safety, the other fairly certain I was going to get laid tonight if I didn't screw this up. Apparently, I was caught up in the debate a bit too long because the resulting silence was not the reply she expected. Finn, you there? Did I lose you? Nope, just considering things. I'm pretty hungry, and I'm about to walk into the bar now, so we can do your place next time perhaps. How did that voice win the argument? No problem. Order me what you're having. I'll see you in 5. And she hung up. I couldn't tell if she was actually enthused or irritated. I guess I'll find out in 5 minutes. I picked a corner booth and ordered the same thing as last time, plus 2 pints of Guinness. She walked in after just a few minutes and was all smiles. I was about to slide out of the booth to greet her, but she was quick to plunk down across from me. Admit it, you're scared to try new things. You like your corner booth and greasy burger and bad coffee down the block, don't you, Finn Rourke? Nonsense. I'm just hungry. You must have been close. Did you drive here? She narrowed her eyes at me, but kept smiling. No, I didn't drive. I got dropped off. This was all a bit odd and needed more explanation. I take it Chacho and the Schnauzer dropped you off then? Sweet black charger with the red stripe? Her smile faded. I think you mean Pietro. And yes, he dropped me off. Why does that matter? I don't understand why you have a personal chauffeur. That guy is a bit off, you must admit. True, she returned her smile, but that's his job. Not really as a personal chauffeur. Just to get things done for the boss. And right now, the boss said to give me a ride when I need it. He doesn't need to know it's not for work-related reasons. I really needed to know something about them and decided to take a chance with a difficult question. So why did your 2 thug friends want to stick a knife in me? You never really explained why they were so confrontational. Tiffany shifted in her seat and spoke quickly. Their job is to act as protection as well. You shouldn't be too surprised to hear that parts of this town can be quite rough. I have to go where the boss tells me, and they're my backup. I'd been having some trouble recently with some low-life types, and they thought you fit the description. That's all, just a mistaken identity. I can have them swing by to apologize in person if you want. No. Feel free to tell them all is forgiven as long as Chacho cuts back on the motor oil in his hair and his pet Schnauzer goes back on his medication. I suspect he likes the zoo a trifle too much. Tiffany just about sprayed me with Guinness as she burst out laughing. There you have it, Nella. An honest explanation for all events. Except for Anand's interest in Mrs. Giovanni, it occurred to me. What about Anand and Mrs. Giovanni, I asked. You never explained that connection. I don't really know for sure. I haven't talked to him since it happened. She looked a bit uncomfortable and continued. Chances are that he is a bit irritated at my lack of results in this matter and is checking on me to make sure I'm actually doing my job." Her eyes stared into the dense foam on her black glass of beer. "He is not patient or kind. This will be over soon." "What, you mean he's going to fire you? Good, you can do better. It might seem hard to imagine living a life free and without worry, but it is possible." I didn't want to sound like a career counselor, but I could almost see the shackles on her ankles and the fear in her heart. She didn't reply, just drank a big gulp of beer. I didn't know what to say, so I reached out and grabbed her hand and squeezed. She flinched at first, and then looked up at me and smiled a weak and scared smile, full of fear, confusion, and regret. Shaking her head slightly, she replied, "Oh, Finn, do you ever think about just dropping everything and disappearing? You know, just leave it all, leave everything behind and start over?" "Well, I sort of did that when I came here. Sure, I grew up not too far from here, and I'll hang out with some old buddies now and then, but for the most part, I keep to myself and my routine. My entire family thought I was crazy when I left a good-paying job in Chicago. My sister even suggested I was suicidal and called me twice a day. God knows how many people she rallied for her prayer marathon to keep me from killing myself." "Well, obviously it worked, didn't it?" she said with a tinge of sarcasm. "Indeed, and what a jerk I am. I never got around to thanking her." We both laughed a little. Never mind the fact that even at my most depressed state, I didn't consider killing myself. There were times when I felt like this entire existence was meaningless and futile with respect to the universe. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to call it quits. "I know exactly what you mean." There was a seriousness in her eyes that was connected to something real, personal. Neither of us spoke and just ate our burgers. Our conversation shifted to small talk and laughter as we discussed where I grew up, my family, and how life changes things. After a lull in the conversation, she asked, "Do I know you well enough to ask about your mother yet?" A twinge hit my stomach as my natural defenses activate every time someone starts digging in that part of my soul. "That depends on whether you are asking me for Anon or for Tiffany." "Oh, that piece of shit will never hear what you tell me about your mother." I don't know why, but I believed her. Maybe because I wanted to, or maybe because there was no opposing voice in the back of my head. Either way, I decided to let her in a little. "What would you like to know?" "Why did you tell me your mother died from cancer? The hospital said she was one of the first amazing remission stories." It's true, that was my standard story for people I didn't know, and I remembered our first conversation to that effect. I thought about apologizing to her for the lie, but I didn't regret it. Strangers don't get to know those details. But here we are, no longer strangers. "My mother died in a hit-and-run car accident exactly 1 month after she was declared cancer-free. We had a party for her a few days before, and I never saw her so alive, even when we were growing up. Like she had experienced something that made her see the world as a wonderful and magical experience. And I was riding that roller coaster with her right up to the top, only to come crashing down the other side." Neither of us said anything. She reached across and held my hand. There was nothing to say, and to my surprise and relief, she didn't apologize like most people do. I reached for my wallet to pull out the picture and slid it across the table. "Cancer kicker party a few days before." Tiffany looked down at the picture and stared at my mother, my sister, and me for several seconds. When she looked up, a tear was rolling down her cheek, carrying a faint trail of black eye makeup. As soon as she noticed the tears, she became flustered and grabbed a napkin to wipe it away. "I'm sorry," she now offered, as if shedding tears over my lost mother was something foreign to me. "Let me run to the ladies' room." And she slid out to fix her makeup. I watched her walk away, admiring her choice and fashion, when her phone buzzed that it had a message. She had left it behind on the table. Normally, I would not hesitate looking at it because, after all, this is the shallow end. But I felt the need to move on and be more. After a few seconds, I realized that getting out of the shallow end is a process and shouldn't be rushed too much. I'll start tomorrow. With an eye on the bathroom door, I reached over and pressed the on button for her phone. the message previewed on the screen without even selecting it. It read in all caps, "Ready?" from Pietro. I quickly put the phone back and looked to the bathroom. All clear. Why on earth would he be texting that? Did they have a prearranged pickup time, or did he just wait in the parking lot? I decided to check for myself and went over to the window that faced the parking lot, and sure enough, backed into the space on the edge was the black Charger with a red stripe down the center. I hustled back just in time to see Tiffany start back to the booth. She was all smiles. "Welcome back. Another beer?" I offered, trying to figure out what the goon in the parking lot had to do with this. "Yeah, why not?" she replied emphatically. I signaled to the waitress, who was on her way over when Tiffany decided to check her phone. She immediately got serious and somewhat deflated and started typing a few sentences. "Everything all right?" "I better skip the beer. Time flew much faster than I thought. Will I see you tomorrow?" The waitress came over and I just asked for the tab. Then to Tiffany I said, "Certainly hope so. I'm not working tomorrow. Doing some things with a few friends in town, but I should be around later. I'll call you." "You better. I got this." And she pulled a couple 20s out of her purse and threw them on the table. Impressive tip. She scooted out the door with a wave, leaving me to settle the tab. Clearly, she did not want me to walk out with her. On the table was the picture of my mother, now with a tiny makeup smudge on the side. I slid it back in the wallet and headed for the door in time to see the taillights of the Charger pull out of the lot and drive away. Tomorrow, then.